Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive, the 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik. If you are joining us today, you are stepping into a really a highly intensive unified study session.
Absolutely. We are glad you're here.
Yeah, we are taking 19 critical topics from the June 19, 2026 current affairs landscape, alongside some targeted prelims and mapping focuses, and we are just breaking them all down.
It's a lot of ground to cover for sure.
It is, yeah. We are going to look at a world where old categories are just violently colliding with modern realities. Like, we have digital firewalls failing to contain criminal networks, international maritime laws being quietly rewritten in backroom deals, and, ancient cultural divides playing out in modern constitutional courts.
It's a really chaotic landscape right now.
Right, and when you look at the sheer volume of global and domestic events happening all at once, it is very easy to feel totally overwhelmed by the noise. So our goal today is to cut through that noise for you and find the underlying architecture connecting all these events.
And the architecture is what really matters here. When we analyze global governance or macroeconomic shifts or even deeply personal social justice issues, we are usually looking at friction points.
Friction points, exactly.
Like, we're looking at what happens when a rigidly structured system, like a legal code written in the 1940s or a diagnostic manual developed in the West, suddenly has to process a reality it was just never designed for.
Yeah, it just breaks down.
It does. And today's material covers an enormous spectrum. We're going to navigate through intelligence sharing, pharma supply chains, agricultural subsidies, and even the nuances of psychiatric diagnoses.
Yeah.
But the constant through line you should be listening for is that tension between centralized authority and decentralized reality.
I love that framing. And that tension is incredibly visible when we look at how the state tries to police the internet, right?
Absolutely.
The central government recently filed an affidavit with the Delhi High Court, and the language they used was just striking. They officially classified Telegram as the new dark web.
Which is a heavy accusation.
It's huge. They're citing its structural role in drug trafficking, the massive NEET 2026 exam paper leaks, and child exploitation material. The government is basically trying to leverage the Section 69A IT Act framework, along with the IT rules of 2021, to bring the platform to heel.
Yeah, but technically speaking, calling it the dark web is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Looking at the architecture of the internet, calling Telegram the dark web feels technically inaccurate. I mean, the dark web traditionally requires specialized routing software like Tor to access hidden marketplaces.
Right, you can't just download it casually.
Exactly. But Telegram is just sitting right there on the Apple App Store and Google Play. It operates completely on the surface web, but it has these dark web features baked right into it.
It's a fascinating hybrid.
Yeah, it's essentially like a heavily fortified, windowless vault operating right in the middle of a public library. Anyone can walk into the library and approach the vault, but the authorities have absolutely no idea what is being traded inside.
That vault analogy perfectly illustrates the regulatory nightmare the government is facing. You are correct that structurally the internet is divided into 3 tiers, right?
Right. Surface, deep, and dark.
Exactly. The surface web is public, the deep web is unindexed but legitimate, like your online banking portal. And the dark web utilizes those encrypted overlay networks, like Tor, to bounce communications and obscure IPs.
So what makes Telegram so dangerous in the eyes of the state, then?
Well, what Telegram has done is democratize the operational advantages of the dark web without requiring the user to have any technical skill.
Oh, so anyone can use it?
Anyone. They offer unlimited subscriber channels, completely anonymous admins, and automated bot networks that handle everything from crypto payments to file delivery. So the government's affidavit isn't really a technical argument.
It's an operational one.
Precisely. They are stating that the illicit economy has physically migrated from the hidden corners of Tor to a surface-level app.
And the government's primary weapon to force compliance here is the Information Technology Rules of 2021, right?
Yes, the IT rules.
Under those rules, any platform in India with more than 5 million registered users is an SSMI, a significant social media intermediary. And Telegram obviously blows past that 5 million mark.
They're well past it, yeah.
And being an SSMI comes with a heavy compliance burden. You have to appoint a resident grievance officer, a 204-7 nodal contact person for law enforcement, and a chief compliance officer.
And the kicker is that they must reside in India.
Right. But Telegram has essentially just ghosted the government on these mandates.
They have. They haven't maintained that local presence, which creates this massive jurisdictional void. When the NEET 2026 paper leaks happened, the National Testing Agency, the NTA, found themselves just shouting into the void.
I remember the NTA chief, Pradeep Joshi, being so frustrated.
Yeah, he noted that they sent repeated specific warnings to Telegram with exact channel names. The platform's response was sluggish. They'd eventually take down a channel, but the admins would just spin up 3 new ones within the hour.
It's whack-a-mole.
Exactly. And because there's no resident grievance officer whose legal liability is on the line in New Delhi, the Indian government has zero physical leverage. This is what triggers Section 69A of the IT Act.
Which gives the state the power to block public access to digital information if it threatens national security or public order.
Right.
So the Delhi High Court is now evaluating if Telegram's refusal to police its own vault is a chronic threat to public order. But Telegram's CEO, Pavel Durov, pushed back aggressively.
He did, and he made a very specific technical accusation.
Yeah, regarding the temporary block India attempted back in June, he accused the Indian government of utilizing BGP hijacking. BGP stands for Border Gateway Protocol, right?
Yes, BGP.
I understand that as basically the postal routing system of the global internet, but how does a government hijack it? And why is Durov so fixated on that?
Well, BGP allows different autonomous networks across the globe to find the most efficient path to deliver data packets. So if you want to access a server in Europe from your phone in Mumbai, BGP determines that route.
Okay, makes sense.
When Durov alleges BGP hijacking, he's accusing Indian ISPs, allegedly under orders from MITI, of intentionally broadcasting false routing information to the global internet.
Wait, so they're lying to the routing system?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
They're telling the internet's postal service that the fastest route to Telegram servers goes through a dead-end black hole in India. It just drops the traffic entirely.
Wow. And MITI denies that, obviously.
Right, they frame it as standard, localized DNS blocking. But Durov's claim highlights this escalating arms race. Telegram is facing immense pressure globally. The EU's Digital Services Act forces platforms to rip down illegal content within 24 hours.
And Durov's arrest in France in August 2024 proved Western governments aren't messing around anymore.
Exactly. They will target executives personally. India doesn't just want a temporary BGP black hole. They want structural, legally binding subordination to domestic law.
So we have a federal government attempting to impose a unified regulatory structure over a fiercely independent, decentralized platform.
That's the tension.
And that dynamic of central intent clashing with regional autonomy isn't just a digital issue. We see the exact same friction playing out in our constitutional politics.
We certainly do.
Let's look at the recent developments in Tamil Nadu regarding their language policy. TN governor just delivered the customary joint address to the Legislative Assembly, and the core message was an uncompromising reiteration of the state's 2-language policy, Tamil and English.
Which is a direct rejection of the center.
Yeah, an undeniable rejection of the union government's National Education Policy 2020, which heavily pushes a 3-language formula.
Right. So the NEP 2020 envisions students learning their regional mother tongue, English, and crucially, Hindi or another modern Indian language up until Class 8.
But Tamil Nadu doesn't see it that way.
No. For TN and several southern states, this isn't seen as an educational enhancement. It's interpreted as a backdoor mechanism for Hindi imposition.
And having the governor read this policy stance is constitutionally significant, right?
Huge. By convention, the governor's address is drafted by the state cabinet. So having him vocalize the rejection of the NEP 2020 formally locks in the state's defiance.
I want to examine the actual legal teeth of this dispute, because the NEP 2020 is ambitious, but it's just a policy framework. It's not an act of parliament.
That's a crucial distinction.
Right. And since education sits on the concurrent list under Entry 25, both the union and the states have the power to legislate. But without a central parliamentary law, does the union actually have any mechanism to force TN to adopt the 3-language formula?
Under the current legal framework, Tamil Nadu is entirely shielded. Policy intent cannot override state autonomy without statutory backing.
Okay, so they're safe.
Yes. Article 345 of the Constitution grants state legislatures the sovereign right to adopt any languages used in the state as the official language. Tamil Nadu chose Tamil and English.
So what is the center relying on?
They rely heavily on the spirit of Article 351, which is a directive commanding the union to promote the spread of the Hindi language.
But a directive to promote doesn't equal coercive legal authority over a state curriculum.
Exactly. Furthermore, attempting to force it runs into fundamental rights protections under Article 30, which grants linguistic minorities the right to establish their own educational institutions.
And, the resistance to this is baked deep into the political DNA of the state. It didn't just start with the NEP 2020.
Not at all. You have to look at the history.
Right. You go back to 1937 to Periyar's massive movement against the Rajaji government's attempt to make Hindi compulsory in Madras presidency schools. And then, of course, the watershed 1965 anti-Hindi agitations.
Those were incredibly pivotal.
They really were. That uprising was triggered by the looming expiration of the constitutional provision that allowed English to be used alongside Hindi. People feared Hindi would become the sole official language of the Union.
And the political fallout was severe.
Very. It resulted in the Official Languages Amendment Act of 1967, which basically guaranteed the continued use of English in perpetuity.
That historical continuity is the defining factor here. The two-language policy was formally codified in TN in 1953 by C. Rajagopalachari.
And it's been defended ever since.
By every single administration, irrespective of which Dravidian party is in power. The center framing this as a tool for national integration simply does not resonate there.
No, because linguistic identity is equated with political sovereignty and resistance to perceived northern hegemony. It's a vivid illustration of how grand federal policy designs shatter when they hit regional realities.
They absolutely do.
And this dynamic, where a centralized intent fails to translate into on-the-ground outcomes, is glaringly obvious when we look at our national health data.
The NFHS 6 data.
Yeah, the newly released National Family Health Survey 6, covering 2023 to 2024. It has produced a data set that presents a massive contradiction regarding our population's nutrition.
It reveals what public health experts call the anemia paradox.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the headline figures for chronic undernutrition, the state appears to be incredibly successful.
The stunting numbers are great, right?
Yeah, really great. Stunting, which measures low height for age in kids under 5, dropped significantly. It went from 35.5% down to 29.3%.
That's a massive reduction in a short time.
It is. We're also seeing institutional deliveries cross 90%, and full immunization is up to 87.1%. The foundational health infrastructure is working.
But then you turn the page to the blood work data, and the numbers are just catastrophic.
They're stubbornly high.
Yeah, 67.1% of children between 6 and 59 months are clinically anemic, and 57% of women of reproductive age are anemic. These figures have barely budged.
In some pockets, they've worsened.
Right. So we have this glaring disconnect. If the state machinery is efficient enough to drop childhood stunting by over 6 percentage points, why is anemia completely immune to state action? Are the Anganwadi centers failing, or is there a fundamental flaw in the Indian diet?
It's actually a profound failure of dietary diversity, compounded by the biological complexity of iron absorption. The success against stunting is largely due to Purana-Pian in the ICDS.
They deliver calories well.
Exactly. They deliver sheer calories and basic macronutrients like rice, wheat, and lentils. Give a child enough consistent calories, and their physical growth markers improve. You solve stunting.
But anemia is trickier.
Much trickier. Iron deficiency anemia requires highly specific micronutrients. You can't fix it just by filling the stomach.
Because the body needs iron to produce hemoglobin.
Right.
To carry oxygen.
Without it, you get chronic fatigue, cognitive impairment in kids, and severe maternal mortality risks. And this is where the Indian dietary landscape is a huge obstacle.
How so?
Iron comes in two forms. Heme iron from animal products and non-heme iron from plant-based sources. Heme iron is highly bioavailable. The body absorbs it easily.
But the Indian diet is largely vegetarian.
Right, which means it relies on non-heme iron from spinach, lentils, etc. And non-heme iron has notoriously poor bioavailability. To absorb it effectively, you need vitamin C in the exact same meal.
And we also have habits that actively block it.
Like drinking tea immediately after a meal. The tannins actively inhibit iron absorption. The government has tried distributing synthetic supplements and fortified rice, but it's not enough to overcome a culturally entrenched diet lacking diverse micronutrients.
And the survey highlights an even more complex crisis in states that have solved undernutrition. We're seeing a severe double burden of malnutrition in states like Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu.
The double burden is the hallmark of the nutrition transition.
Right. So they eradicated severe stunting, but due to rapid urbanization, sedentary lifestyles, and processed foods, obesity rates are exploding.
Exactly. Nationally, 26.7% of women are now overweight, and 24.2% are obese.
So a primary healthcare center in Kerala faces an impossible mandate. They have to treat an agricultural worker with iron deficiency anemia and an urban worker with obesity-induced type 2 diabetes at the same time.
The infrastructure is being crushed between diseases of poverty and diseases of affluence.
It's wild. So we're grappling with these deep domestic crises, but at the exact same time, India is forced to navigate a rapidly accelerating global order. The internal health is critical, but so is our external security.
The global stage is very volatile right now.
It really is. Which brings us to a massive diplomatic event happening right in New Delhi. On June 22nd and 23rd, India is hosting the BRICS National Security Advisors meeting under the theme Responsive BRICS for a Secure Future.
And this NSA meeting is fundamentally different from standard BRICS summits. Those usually focus on trade and currency.
Right, this is the political and security pillar.
Exactly. This is where the hard, uncompromising discussions about counterterrorism, border security, and intelligence sharing happen, and the guest list in New Delhi is extraordinary.
Oh, it's a geopolitical minefield. You have India's NSA, Ajit Doval, chairing. Across the table, Russia's Nikolai Patrushev, representing a nation fighting a ground war under historic sanctions.
And Iran's Ali Ahmadian is there, too.
Right, from the IRGC, representing a state in a shadow war with the U.S. And crucially, China's Wang Yi. He's China's foreign minister and a Politburo member, attending in an NSA equivalent capacity.
Wang Yi's presence is really the fulcrum here. The diplomatic balancing act for Ajit Doval is just staggering. India is trying to forge a unified security consensus with a bloc containing our primary border adversary, our largest sanctioned military supplier, and a Middle Eastern power opposed to our U.S. partners.
So what are India's priorities for this meeting?
3 core priorities. First is counterterrorism. Post-Operation Sindoor, India is pushing for a multilateral framework to target cross-border terrorism, specifically dismantling Pakistani terror networks.
But this is where the BRICS consensus inevitably fractures, right? India wants a joint communique that explicitly names Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed.
But China is sitting right there.
Exactly. Beijing constantly acts as Pakistan's diplomatic shield at the UN. Will Wang Yi actually sign a document in New Delhi that throws Islamabad under the bus?
Historically, China dilutes the language. They prefer generic condemnations. The exact phrasing they negotiate will be an accurate barometer for the Sino-Indian bilateral relationship.
Which is the massive shadow hanging over the entire summit.
Yes.
Yeah.
The military disengagement at the LAC has been agonizingly slow since late 2024. So Wang Yi traveling to New Delhi is a massive signal. It's a rare chance for Doval to pull him into a closed-door sideline meeting.
Hopefully to finally schedule the 25th round of the special representative talks. What are the other 2 priorities?
Energy security and AI governance. With the 2024 expansion, BRICS absorbed major energy players like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. They'll focus on resilient supply chains. And for AI, India is pitching its MANA-V framework as a standard for national security AI.
Which will clash with China's authoritarian AI models.
And Russia's cyber warfare perspectives, yes.
You mentioned energy security in Iran. That's the perfect segue to the most critical geopolitical development of the month. Iran's presence at BRICS is totally altered by the massive economic lifeline they just secured.
The U.S.-Iran Muscat Accord.
Yeah, signed on June 14th, 2026. This deal completely rewires the global energy market after months of absolute chaos. Let's analyze it.
The economic context before the accord was grim. The U.S. had enforced a suffocating naval blockade and maximum pressure sanctions. Iran's economy was in freefall.
Their GDP contracted by 15% in the first quarter of 2026 alone.
Because their lifeblood oil exports was severed. Inflation breached 120%, causing actual food shortages. The state was running a $30 billion quarterly deficit.
And the Muscat Accord halts that collapse instantly.
It does.
It unfroze $5 to $7 billion from South Korea immediately. But the larger framework involves the phased release of $180 billion in frozen assets over 3 years, contingent on compliance.
But the real game changer is the oil.
Right. The U.S. OFAC utilized general licenses instead of forcing companies to get specific waivers to buy Iranian oil.
Which takes months and is often denied.
Exactly. These general licenses legally permit Iranian oil and petrochemicals to be traded without fear of secondary U.S. sanctions. Prior to the blockade, Iran pumped 3.2 million barrels a day. Bringing that back online is a massive injection of supply.
But, reading the fine print, this isn't a comprehensive peace treaty.
Oh, not at all. It's a highly volatile, temporary ceasefire with a ticking clock. I view it like a bomb squad trying to defuse a complex device, and the timer is locked at 60 days.
The August 13 deadline.
Right. The most critical wire they have to cut before the timer hits 0 is capping Iran's nuclear enrichment.
And the nuclear math is terrifying. Under the blockade, Iran accelerated the program. They have over 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium.
Which is just a hair away from 90% weapons grade.
By August 13, Tehran is legally obligated to cap future enrichment at 3.67%, physically dismantle advanced centrifuges, and dilute or ship out their 60% stockpile.
Right now, they've only agreed to freeze activities while negotiations continue. Imagine the contingency planning at the Reserve Bank of India right now.
Oh, it must be intense.
The RBI has to build models for a purely binary outcome. If the August 13 deadline is met, Brent crude stabilizes around $85 a barrel. Inflation cools, the rupee strengthens. But if it collapses,
The U.S. snaps back the blockade.
instantly. Oil spikes over $120 a barrel, and the RBI burns through billions in forex reserves just to keep the rupee from cratering.
And the RBI has to factor in massive external spoiler risks, the most prominent being Israel.
Because they view any latent nuclear infrastructure in Iran as an existential threat.
Yes, and the IDF has rehearsed long-range strikes on facilities like Fordo. A preemptive strike would vaporize the accord.
And there are internal spoilers too, right? Like the IRGC.
The IRGC operates almost as a parallel state. Hardline factions could easily authorize asymmetrical operations, harassing shipping or surging weapons to proxies that violate the spirit of the accord.
Plus the fragile de-escalation across the Lebanese border. If a war breaks out there, the nuclear negotiations are irrelevant. The sequencing of this deal is a nightmare.
It really is.
But beneath all the nuclear brinkmanship, there's a subtle legal concession hidden in the Accord's text regarding the very waters where the oil travels.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, Section 6. A Hindu analysis highlighted a concerning linguistic shift. U.S. negotiators agreed to language acknowledging Iran's sovereign rights and security interests over the approaches to the strait.
Which is alarming for maritime lawyers.
Because geographically, the strait is super narrow, 33 to 55 kilometers wide. The shipping lanes physically sit within Iranian and Omani territorial waters. So doesn't sovereignty naturally apply?
It does, but international maritime law under UNCLSS dictates that geography doesn't grant absolute control over global choke points. The strait connects the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, so it's subject to the principle of transit passage.
Meaning continuous, unhindered transit for all vessels.
Exactly. A coastal state absolutely cannot suspend this passage, impose tolls, or restrict navigation based on subjective security claims.
But Tehran has never recognized that. They claim it's their exclusive zone of responsibility and assert the right to board and inspect vessels.
And the U.S. Navy has spent decades rejecting that claim.
So why the concession now? By formalizing sovereign rights in the accord, did the U.S. essentially trade away a foundational principle of maritime law just for a 60-day nuclear freeze?
It's a highly legitimate fear. And it leaves nations like India very exposed.
Because over 40% of our crude oil imports pass through that channel. What if next year Iran uses this legal cover to demand a transit tax on Indian tankers? Or start systematically boarding them?
India ratified UNCLS in 1995, so our legal stance is absolute. Restricting transit passage is invalid. New Delhi will likely have to open back channels with Washington to ensure this wording doesn't become customary international law.
Exactly. Securing smooth transit is vital, but it's not just about oil. We also have to secure the movement of our skilled professionals. Let's shift to economy and trade, specifically a massive victory in the India-UK CETA.
The Double Contribution Convention, or DCC. Yes, Section 7. It sounds like an obscure tax rule, but industry analysts estimate this will save Indian IT professionals and employers $500 million annually.
$500 million injected straight into the Indian services sector.
How was the old dual contribution system penalizing our workers?
Under the old regime, if an Indian IT firm deployed an engineer to the UK for a 2-year assignment, they were caught in a trap. They had to remit contributions to India's EPFO, but the moment they worked on UK soil, they also had to pay into the UK's national insurance system.
Which pays for the NHS, pensions, etc.
Right, and it's a massive deduction. The Indian employer paid about 13.8% of the employee's gross UK salary, and the employee had 8 to 12% deducted from their paycheck.
So for a £60,000 salary, that's £12,000 to £18,000 a year.
And they returned home before ever qualifying for a UK pension. They were subsidizing the British welfare state for nothing.
So the DCC severs that trap.
Completely. Under the DCC, Indian professionals on temporary assignments are entirely exempt from UK national insurance for up to 5 years. That dramatically boosts the competitiveness of Indian IT firms bidding for UK contracts. It's highly effective economic diplomacy.
India has about 20 of these Social Security totalization agreements globally, but securing the UK is a landmark achievement.
And this economic diplomacy runs parallel to intense security diplomacy. Let's move to Section 8, Internal Security. Union Home Minister Amit Shah just met with the U.S. Ambassador Eric Garcetti.
Right, and the agenda underscored the strategic convergence between the U.S. and India, particularly post-Operation Sindoor. The focus was narcotics and counterterrorism.
Specifically, the Golden Crescent in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
The illicit opiates flowing down through Pakistan and bleeding into Indian border states.
It's a massive vector for narcoterrorism. The meeting highlighted the operational integration between the U.S. DEA and India's NCB.
But the big takeaway was expanding the Counterterrorism Cooperation Initiative, the CTCI. And this connects perfectly to Topic 1. The expanded CTCI specifically targets drug cartels using Telegram. So the local Delhi High Court headache is actually a top-tier international intelligence priority.
The convergence is total. They also discussed cross-border terror networks, with India pressing concerns about Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed in Pakistan.
And the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to press Islamabad. They also discussed the extradition trial of Taha Rana, right?
Yes, a key conspirator in the 26/11 attacks, currently facing a tough extradition battle in the U.S. The U.S. government is supporting India's request, which shows a huge commitment to the partnership.
But funding these security operations requires a strong treasury. Let's look at public finance, Section 9. Direct tax collection data.
The numbers are robust. Net direct tax collection for FY26 hit Rs 5.21 lakh crore, a 15.1% growth trajectory.
But the internal split is what's fascinating. Personal income tax, or PIT, brought in Rs 3.52 lakh crore, completely eclipsing corporate tax at Rs 1.47 lakh crore. Why is the individual citizen bearing so much more of the burden?
Corporate tax growth is sluggish due to macroeconomic headwinds, compressed profit margins from global slowdowns and supply chain logistics costs. PIT, however, is surging because of a technology-driven revolution in tax enforcement.
The digital panopticon. The government aggressively widened the tax net. ITR filings hit a record 8.9 crore, driven by two tools. First, the Annual Information Statement, the AIS.
It's a comprehensive dossier.
Yeah, it aggregates data from everywhere. Property, stocks, foreign travel. When a taxpayer sees the government already has a 360-degree view of their finances, the incentive to hide income vanishes.
It dragged 43 lakh new taxpayers into the formal net just in FY26.
And the second tool is faceless assessment. No more face-to-face meetings with local assessing officers, which used to be a breeding ground for bribery.
The AI randomly allocates scrutiny cases thousands of miles away. It sanitizes the process.
It's brilliant e-governance. But despite this, our overall tax-to-GDP ratio is still stubbornly hovering at a mere 11.5%. The OECD average is 33%. If we have this flawless AI dragnet, why is our ratio so low?
Because the digital tools only capture the formal sector. The vast informal economy, unregistered MSMEs, cash-based retail, casual labor operates beneath the AIS radar, and agricultural income remains exempt.
Plus our heavy reliance on indirect taxes, which brought in Rs 11.23 lakh crore.
Which are inherently regressive.
Exactly. A daily wage laborer pays the same GST on a bar of soap as a billionaire. So expanding the direct tax base is critical. And speaking of agriculture, Section 10 looks at the PM Kisan 20th installment.
On June 19, the PM released Rs 18,880 crore to 9.44 crore farmers simultaneously.
A massive direct benefit transfer. And the timing is critical, right? It coincides with the Kharif sowing season.
Yes. The macroeconomic conditions for farmers are brutal right now, a looming 35% monsoon deficit and highly elevated fertilizer prices. This cash injection stabilizes front-end costs.
But the policy design is a flat Rs 6,000 per year per family. Given that 71% of Indian farmers are marginal, owning under 1 hectare isn't a flat rate inherently regressive. A 10-hectare commercial estate gets the same as a half-hectare subsistence farmer.
That is the primary structural critique. For the marginal farmer, Rs 6,000 is meaningful. For the wealthy farmer, it's statistically negligible.
Which is why there are demands to double it to Rs 12,000, or match progressive state schemes like Telangana's Raitu Bandhu, which pays per acre.
But doubling PM Kisan would add a permanent baseline expenditure of Rs 37,000 crore annually, blowing a hole in the fiscal deficit targets.
Right, and subsidizing farmers is only half the battle. If we want them to export, they hit invisible walls at the border. Section 11, non-tariff barriers.
The era of the tariff is essentially ending.
Because tariffs are simple, they're like a heavy lock on the front door. You negotiate the tax down to 0, the door opens. But non-tariff barriers, NTBs, are like an invisible laser security grid inside the house.
Exactly. Let's take the UK automotive sector under CETA. India might slash import tariffs to zero, but we won't be flooded with British cars because of our domestic NTBs.
Right. Localized safety standards, BSVI emission norms, complex homologation testing.
Those act as an impenetrable filter. And obviously this cuts both ways. When Indian exporters ship to London or the EU, they hit foreign laser grids.
Which are categorized into TBTs and SPS measures.
Right. Technical barriers to trade, like India's BIS quality control orders, keep out cheap Chinese goods, and sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which govern food safety. The EU is the master of SPS, using tiny pesticide residue limits to ban Indian agricultural exports.
And the most controversial NTB currently is the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM, taking effect in 2026.
It slaps a massive carbon price on heavy industrial goods like steel entering the EU.
And since Indian steel uses older, carbon-intensive tech, our exporters face catastrophic penalties. How does India's carbon credit trading scheme, the CCTS, defend against this?
It's strategic pragmatism. If India establishes a domestic carbon market where our companies pay a recognized carbon price at home, EU regulations stipulate they must credit that payment against the CBAM penalty at the border.
So the compliance capital stays in the Indian economy instead of going to Brussels. It's a complex, multi-front war for our exports. But our most important export is our human capital, which brings us to a depressing domestic crisis in Section 12, graduate unemployment.
The H-hit is terrifying. India produces 9 million graduates annually, but only 40–45% find formal employment in their field within 2 years.
And youth unemployment is sitting at 15.2%. We have a crisis of educated unemployment.
Because there's a catastrophic misalignment between university curriculums and global economic demands. Most enrollments are in general arts and humanities, while expanding sectors need technical STEM or vocational skills.
But even in STEM, quality control is lacking. An ACT report said 65% of graduating engineering students are deemed unemployable by industry standards. Are we suffering from a qualifications trap?
That's the exact diagnostic term. A degree no longer signals actual competency, it just signals you survive the system.
And contrast that with Germany's Berufsschule vocational system, where 35% of youth get highly rigorous, industry-integrated training. In India, barely 5% enter ITIs because of the cultural stigma against blue-collar work.
We need to rewire the educational architecture before our demographic window peaks around 2041.
And this systemic failure in quality control heavily impacts our life-saving pharmaceutical exports. Section 13, Pharmaceutical Regulatory Oversight.
India is the pharmacy of the world, but that reputation is hemorrhaging credibility.
Because the U.S. FDA has been issuing dozens of Form 483's severe quality control violation notices to Indian facilities, and the UK regulator is doing the same, what is the fundamental rot here?
The legal architecture. The $27 billion modern pharma sector is still governed by the colonial-era Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940.
It predates modern good manufacturing practice standards entirely.
Yes. And the fatal flaw is dual regulation. You have the central CDSEO, but physical manufacturing licenses and inspections are decentralized to state drug control authorities, the SDCAs.
Which is like a local municipal traffic cop enforcing international aviation safety standards. It's absurd.
It creates a market for regulatory arbitrage. A shady manufacturer denied a license in a strict state just crosses the border to a lax state. And enforcement capacity is non-existent. There are roughly 7,000 facilities nationally, but only about 500 active SDCA inspectors.
One inspector for every 14 complex chemical plants. It's an honor system. And that leads directly to tragedies like the contaminated cough syrups in 2022. The pending DMDC bill aims to centralize power under an independent IDRA, right?
Yes, but until Parliament passes it, the damage continues.
And flawed legal frameworks don't just harm exports, they fail our most vulnerable citizens. Section 14 looks at the Supreme Court's Homemakers verdict.
The court tried to standardize compensation calculations in motor accident claims tribunals when a homemaker is killed. They established a notional income floor of Rs. $30,000 per month.
Which sounds progressive, but a sharp critique in the Indian Express tore into the class blinkers of the verdict.
Because the court used a market replacement methodology based on urban middle-class domestic services.
And that completely erases the reality of rural agrarian homemakers. A rural Dalit woman isn't just cooking and sweeping. She performs intensive agricultural labor, manages livestock, fetches water.
Exactly. Setting a floor based on an urban domestic helper massively undervalues her multidimensional economic contribution.
The court slapped an urban neoliberal price tag on rural agrarian survival. It shows why jurisprudence must acknowledge regional and caste diversity.
And acknowledging regional specificity is also a matter of life and death in public health. Section 15. Kerala's Nipah risk profile.
Kerala has seen 5 of the 7 Nipah outbreaks in India, highly concentrated around Kozhikode. It has a massive fatality rate and no vaccine. Why Kerala?
Ecologically, the Western Ghats host a huge population of Tariffs bats, the natural reservoir,
Yeah.
and the orchards create a high human-bat interface. But the real answer is the Kerala paradox.
Detection versus occurrence.
Yes, Kerala isn't necessarily generating more spillovers. Their health infrastructure actually catches them. They have a dense ASHA network, integrated disease surveillance, and, crucially, localized rapid PCR testing.
So if someone shows up with acute encephalitis, they don't just guess. They run a PCR panel and flag Nipah within hours.
In other states without that capacity, a local spillover burns out and gets recorded as fever of unknown origin. Kerala's aggressive surveillance makes them look like a hotspot, but it's actually a success story.
That reframing is brilliant. And speaking of government intervention, let's look at the macroeconomic fallout of global events. Section 16, fuel measure rollbacks.
On June 18th, the government slashed petrol and diesel prices by Rs5 per liter.
Reversing the emergency hikes from May, and this ties directly back to the Muscat Accord in Topic 5.
It's a textbook cause and effect. During the Hormuz blockade, Brent crude skyrocketed, and Indian oil marketing companies faced crippling under-recoveries. The government had to step in with hikes and subsidies.
But the Muscat Accord unfroze Iranian supply, and Brent crude dropped below the magic $95 a barrel threshold.
The under-recoveries instantly transformed into positive margins. The government saved Rs 30,000 to Rs 40,000 crore in subsidies and passed the savings to the consumer.
Right in time for the Kharif harvest, cooling rural inflation. It's incredible how a diplomatic deal in Oman makes tractor fuel cheaper in Punjab 2 days later.
It really is.
But while we can easily measure fuel prices, how do we measure the psychological toll of economic displacement? Section 17 looks at a groundbreaking Nipah study on Adivasi mental distress in Jharkhand.
The researchers found a massive disconnect between clinical psychiatry and indigenous reality. Adivasi youth don't use clinical terms. They use culturally embedded phrases.
Like nirasha for hopelessness or garkichinta. And the most striking one, jungle ke liye tarsna, a deep physical yearning for the forest.
And standard psychiatry forces doctors to map this grief onto the DSM-5, labeling it as clinical depression.
Which medical anthropologists call a category fallacy. When an Adivasi youth says they yearn for the forest, they aren't suffering a serotonin drop. They're experiencing intergenerational grief from land displacement and Forest Rights Act failures.
Yes. Attempting to diagnose this with a Western checklist is like trying to measure a fever with a tape measure. Giving them an SSRI antidepressant pacifies the symptom but ignores the systemic disease.
It's a stark warning about rigid categorizations. And we see another example in Section 18, vitiligo awareness.
World Vitiligo Day highlights the immense social stigma around a non-contagious autoimmune condition affecting 1 crore Indians.
The immune system mistakenly destroys melanocytes, causing white patches. It's not an infection, but societal myths are brutal. It's falsely linked to past sins or dietary mix-ups.
And it leads to systemic bullying in schools and insurmountable barriers in the marriage market. But the glaring legal injustice is that vitiligo is excluded from the PWD Act 2016.
Despite severe cases causing extreme photosensitivity, skin cancer risks, and functional ocular impairments, the legislature is lagging decades behind the medical reality, denying protections to 1 crore citizens.
It's a massive gap in social equity. And closing gaps is the theme of our final analytical topic. Section 19, PM Modi at Vivatech.
Modi was the keynote speaker at the Paris Expo, but the real value was the closed-door meetings with French industry titans, Total Energies for green hydrogen, LVMH for luxury retail, and Bailey's for defense.
And the messaging shifted from Make in India to Design in India, positioning India as a hub for R&D and high-level engineering.
The biggest win was the Airbus joint venture, establishing a final assembly line for the C-295 military transport aircraft in Vadodara, the first time an Airbus will be built from scratch in India by a private consortium.
They're aiming to scale it up and use Vadodara as an export hub. It marks a shift from being a dependent buyer to an integrated co-producer.
Exactly. India is building sovereign industrial capacity. All right, that concludes the 19 core topics. But for you listening, we're pivoting to the rapid-fire revision sections, prelims and focus and mapping. Let's hit the hard facts. First, Exercise Conquest 2026.
A multinational UN peacekeeping exercise in Mongolia. India deployed a specialized contingent from the JAT regiment, rehearsing high-risk UN mandates like civilian evacuation and counter-IED protocols. India remains the largest historical contributor of UN troops.
Awesome. Next, a quick recap of the PM Kisan rules.
Are $6,000 per year in 3 installments via Aadhaar DBT exclusions, income taxpayers, institutional landholders, and retired government employees above a certain pension threshold.
Tax to GDP ratio and economic data.
FY26 ratio is 11.5%, far below the OECD's 33%. Direct tax collection hit Rs 5.21 lakh crore, driven by POD via the AIS and faceless assessment tools.
What about the constitutional anchors for Vikas B, Viasat B?
Article 49 under DPSP mandates the state to protect historical monuments, and Article 51 AF is a fundamental duty for citizens to preserve our compass of culture.
And the updated BRICS membership for 2026.
11 full members now. The original 5 plus the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and Indonesia. They represent 46% of the global population.
Perfect. Now into mapping. We have 6 locations. Where are we starting?
Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, host of Conquest, and known for its third neighbor policy to balance against Russia and China.
Number 2.
Rajbari, Bangladesh. Proposed site for the Padma Barrage. Critical because the 1996 Ganges Treaty expires in December 2026.
Number 3, back to the Middle East.
Fordow, Iran. The heavily fortified subterranean uranium enrichment facility at the center of the Muscat Accord's 60-day window.
And domestically.
Kozhikode, Kerala, the Nipah epicenter, Vasco da Gama's 1498 landing site, and a UNESCO City of Literature.
Number 5.
Nice, France. The site on the French Riviera for the Modi-Macron bilateral talks and the Farhat Innovate Showcase.
And finally, the heritage nodes.
Varanasi, Ayodhya, and Ujjain. Central to the Vikas B Virasat B push with the Kashi Vishwanath, Ram Mandir, and Mahakalo corridors.
That is an incredible volume of information. If we synthesize the master narrative today, we saw a local high court trying to regulate Telegram, a geopolitical pivot in Muscat, and a Devasi youth yearning for the forest. These aren't isolated events.
They're symptoms of a rapidly modernizing, deeply interconnected world where the old rigid rules just no longer function.
The diagnostic X-ray machine is broken. And that leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. We've marveled at how AI is being deployed to track tax evaders, fix supply chains, and govern the dark web.
Right.
But as India tries to build global security frameworks like MANA-V for AI at BRICS, are we just taking our own deeply flawed human biases, like the class blinkers in our courts or the cultural blindness in our medicine, and permanently encoding them into the very algorithms meant to save us?
That's a terrifying necessary question.
Review your notes, question the categories, connect the dots, and stay intensely curious. We will see you in the next deep dive.